Okay, it's 2:05. I suggest that we start and maybe people who are late can still come in. I may ask you to close the doors after about 10 minutes because we will have some discussions that require everyone to be present more or less from the beginning. So, because we're going to talk about a topic that can be difficult. So, may I ask Lucia and Nuria to maybe close the door at 15 past? Would that be okay?
Yes.
Amazing. Okay. Fantastic. Let's do it. Welcome, everyone. My name is Juliette Sanchez-Lambert, and my colleague Eleonore is here with me today. We're very pleased to see you. Um, Thank you. Thank you for joining us. We're gonna get started right now. Before we start, I wanted to explain what's the story behind this workshop and why we are here today. So earlier this year, in March, I had the pleasure to run a very similar workshop, which was an online workshop for the VUB University, which is part of the EUTOPIA consortium, and a workshop that was supposed to be happening in person ended up being taking place online for reasons that you can imagine, global pandemic. And it was a huge success, actually. We had two workshops, one for students of the university and one for staff of the university, with about 200 participants in each workshop. So it was pretty clear with this experience that the topic of sexual harassment is a very important one in society as at large, but in university there's a big need to talk about it, and especially giving tools to people to react and know what to do when they witness or even when they experience sexual harassment themselves. So that's the whole topic of today's workshop. And so I am very pleased, together with my colleague, we're very pleased to give you a little taster session of what this kind of workshop can look like. And of course, we will have time for discussion. So I'm going to move on to what's our program for today for the next 85 minutes. So of course, we're going to start with an introduction, and then we're going to talk about the bystander effect and how the bystander effect led to the bystander intervention concept and programs at university that are built to help prevent sexual harassment. And we're going to talk also about how do we identify harassment, because obviously if we want to know what to do, we have to know what we are acting against, and so how important it is to actually know what harassment looks like. We're going to do a little practice, and then there will be some time for Q&A at the end of the session. So these are technical points, but actually we weren't sure if there would be more people online than in the room. So maybe we can skip that. Obviously, those of you who are online, please rename yourselves if you can, and use the chat if you have questions. So my colleague Eleonore and I will be monitoring the chat, but the support team also will be there to check your questions. And in order to make it as comfortable as possible in this hybrid situation, we will only answer questions at dedicated times as opposed to as they come, because it might be difficult to handle both people in our online conference room and those in the physical conference room. Okay, why are we here? So I think it's important to introduce ourselves. So I'm going to start with myself and also why I came, what is my journey that led me to run workshops on bystander intervention and sexual harassment. And for me, it started as a student myself at about 7 years ago with my colleagues, fellow students. We realized that sexual harassment was very prevalent in our university, Hull University, not to name it. But there was very little done, and it seemed that it was understood to be part of the culture, part of the party culture, the student culture. People had very unpleasant experience and unwanted behaviors that were directed towards them, and very little was done about it. So what we did, we created a collective, we started to raise awareness about it, we launched a survey at university, and this really started my own engagement against sexual harassment. So really, it came from university. Sorry, in 2019, so that's fast forward a few years, I, together with another colleague of mine, Sarah Hassan, we wrote a book, It's Not That Grey, which is a practical guide on how to identify harassment. We will communicate the link. It's free and available online. And part of the red flag system that we developed in the guide, we're going to use today for this workshop. And this year, I actually joined the association that Eleanor is a co-founder. She will talk to you about it. And in my professional life, I do a lot of things, but I also now intervene in universities to train on bystander prevention and sexual harassment. So that's about me. And over to you, Eleanor.
Hi, thank you, Juliette, for this. So my name is Eleanor Noel. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm really happy to be co-hosting this workshop with Juliette. So a bit like Juliette, my story starts in university a few years back, where although I am French, I moved to Canada for my bachelor's and was first taught about consent in my integration week. That was very new to me. And very exciting, but also I found that the way that it was taught wasn't necessarily reaching students in a way that they actually digested it and took it with them properly. So I developed a little campaign on the campus where I was at the time, which you can see on the right. And later on, I came back to Europe. So fast forward a few years as well. And in 2019, I co-founded with Ela Monique, who's not here with us, but very much present in a way, the association Sexe et Consentement in France that does sexual violence prevention through consent education on university campuses all across France. As part of Sexe et Consentement, we also launched a petition recently to ask for legal mentions regarding consent for advertisements, but also packaging of any products that have to do with sexual health. The idea is to make the notion of consent more present on the public sphere, and it's a petition that reached more than 17,000 signatures already, so we'll see where that goes. So that's a little bit about me, but now I think we're going to move on already to start with our program.
Yes. Just a few words about how we approach this session. Like I said at the beginning, the topic of sexual harassment and sexual violence at large can be a very triggering one. And we do that for every workshop that we give to actually say that we intend to make it a safer space. So really, we invite you to take care of yourself. It's at some point you don't feel good, you need to take a break, please do so. There's no problem about that. Try and be here and be present. So those online, maybe close your email inbox. Those in the room, maybe put your cell phone away, unless, of course, there's an emergency that you may have to attend to. I mean, we understand that you have life and obligations, but if possible, put your phone away. Use I statements, especially during the discussion. So we speak from the experience of our own lives. And try and be curious, actively listen. I'm sure that some of you in the room have already have expertise on the topic. So try and see what you're gonna hear today that you might not have heard before. And on the other hand, during discussion, please feel free to share with us things that you know, experiences that you had that you think can be useful to, of course, us as trainers, because we always learn and we ameliorate of content every single time, but obviously to your colleagues in the room. And then if you are sharing anything personal, be it for example, a personal experience, I may ask the people who are listening and hearing this to not share it to the outside world. So it means to not go on and quote, for example, oh, Eleonore told me that she did this and that in her life. So you can share the content of the workshop, but please do not name people, obviously. Okay, and we can move on, and I can ask the support team, the lovely support team on site, to please close the doors. Thank you. Okay. Oh, that's one last thing. So we wanted to ask you to think, well, it says tell us in the chat, obviously, the big majority of you cannot do that. So just take a second and think, do you actually know where harassment victims can seek support in your university and country? The reason why we ask this question is that usually when we start our workshops, we give any emergency contact details such as rape support centers, place to report harassment, where to get support, etc. at the very beginning of the workshop. So there's general practice that's at the end you send an email with all the information that people may need, but we actually know that people can be triggered during the workshop, so they may leave without having that information. So you come from a multitude of university. We don't speak the language of all the countries that you come from. So we just invite you to make sure that you have that information, and if you want to share it with us, you're more than welcome to. So this was a way to counter that fact, but also say, give the information before you can even imagine that someone will need it, actually. That's always a good approach. Okay, and now over to you, Eleonore.
Thank you, Juliette. So you may or may not know this person. Her name was Kitty Genovese. She was an Italian-American woman who lived in New York City in the 1960s. Until in 1964, she was followed after work at night as she was going home, and she was assaulted, stabbed, and then subsequently raped and murdered by the person who was following her. So this story is extremely violent. But what happened and what's important about it is that there were a lot of neighbors that were witnesses and that did little or did not seek to support her. For some little details, the story happened in two parts, where she was first assaulted, screamed, then escaped, and then her assaulter came back. So in that meantime, if someone would have helped, it possibly could have been a different outcome. So the question following this was, how come nobody helped? This led to quite a few studies, including one by Biblatane and John Darley, which led to the notion of bystander effect. So what's the bystander effect? The bystander effect is basically the notion or the idea that the more people there are that are witnessing a situation, the less likely they are to intervene. Why? Because there is a diffusion of responsibility. The more people are there, the more people are going to think, oh, maybe someone else will intervene that is more able to intervene, or maybe like, you freeze and you think someone else will do it. So the more people there are, the less likely they are to react. That is the idea of the bystander effect. We're aware that some studies have gone against this finding, but it is important for us to talk about the bystander effect because it also led to the creation of the notion of active bystander, which we're going to talk about today. So why don't people act? We have this notion of diffusion of responsibility, this so-called bystander effect. There's also a social influence. So it's this bystander effect is not just a diffusion of responsibility, it's also this bias of conformity. So basically, we choose to not act because we see that others do not act. And therefore we think, is it just in my head? If nobody's acting, perhaps I don't need to react. So that's also another reason why people tend to not intervene. There's also a question of social position. So sometimes people might not be in a position to react. If you witness a situation of harassment in the workplace, for instance, that is committed by someone who is your superior, and you just arrived in that community, in this workplace, you might not feel that you are in a position to react without undermining your own position. There's also a question of relationships. So in fact, you might fear retaliation, or you might fear to undermine the relationship you have with people involved if you actually get involved, in the situation that you witness. And finally, there is this idea of vested interest. So in some situations, you might feel that you do not have an interest to intervene because actually it might come back against you. Or on the contrary, if you are potentially someone who might be likely to act in similar ways as someone who is perpetrating a discriminatory behavior, for instance, it is unlikely that you will act because it might be something that you would, not want someone to intervene when you do it. So that's the idea of no vested interests. So now that we see why people do not act, let's see basically what is the emergency. For this, I'm going to ask you to take a little quiz. So there's a QR code that you can scan, or you go to menti.com and use the codes that's on the screen. And we're going to see some numbers.
I just copied the link in the Zoom chat for those of you who joined us online, so it might be easier. I'm just going to quickly stop sharing my screen, go to the Mentimeter page, and you will see the code again. So that's just going to... 1 second. Okay, so as you can see on the top of the screen, for those of you who have not joined yet and are in the room, so you are allowed to take your cell phones again for that exercise. I should have made it clearer, and then you can put it away again. So the code is on the top of the page, and you can go to menti.com. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes, and then, or just 1 minute or so, and then we will start.
So that was quick. So we see here that of the people who responded to this question, 55% actually gave the wrong number. According to a study at University of Liège, how many students have experienced an attempted forced sexual relationship? The answer, according to the study, is 19%. So that's, almost 20%, almost 1 in 5 students. This number is quite impressive and quite sad. What's also interesting and important to know about this study is that so 6% had actually experienced an attempted, a forced sexual relationship, and 83%. This study found that 83% of perpetrators were known to the victim. And also that the assault or the rape in this case took place at a party or at the house of the victim or perpetrator. So why is it important to remind those numbers? There's a very common myth about sexual violence and especially rape, that it happens in a dark corner on the streets, in a parking lot or something, that someone is going to jump out of a bush and attack someone. Unfortunately, the reality is that, as we see in the study, 83% of perpetrators are known to the victim. So actually, it's not a stranger that attacks people. It is someone that the victim knows. Also, the idea that sexual assault and sexual violence happens outside. Some types of sexual violence happen outside. We can think of sexual harassment, for instance. But in the majority of cases for rape or attempted rape, it happens indoors. It happens at the place of the victim or at the place of the perpetrator, in many cases. So we're going to see the next question.
Yes. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Mentimeter is not exactly cooperating right now, so I'm just gonna quickly solve that problem. No matter how used we are to doing things online, there's always a risk that things don't exactly go according to plan. Okay. Okay, maybe you can talk about the 1 in 3 statistic, Eleonor,
Yes.
while I try and figure this out.
So another statistic that we want to talk to you about as like an introduction or like as a statement of the issue that we're facing is that 1 in 3 women worldwide have been found by the UN Women to have suffered some form of physical or intimate violence. So sexual violence and harassment, human trafficking, child marriage, intimate partner violence, or physical violence. So 1 in 3 women worldwide is, again, quite an impressive and depressing number. But it also means that a lot can be done to improve the situation because we're starting so low. It's often a number that people are surprised about, at least people who might not be as concerned with or have suffered as much violence. But it is indeed a very accurate one. So the problem is solved. So now we can go on to the next question with the next number. So you might have this number already, but you can go on to the next question. Juliette, you're not sharing your screen anymore.
I'm gonna figure this out.
Okay.
Apologies. Okay. We did get the answers. Okay, there we go.
So this study is also very interesting. It was a study that was made in Canada. And it was found that 50% of sexual violence was experienced, sexual violence among students, that's another important thing to say, happened during the first 3 months of university. That's the so-called red zone. And it is something that's important to note because it is related to students being newcomers to the campus, being unfamiliar. Often many students are away from home for the first time, or at least not under their parents' roof in many situations. There's a lot of partying going on, really a will to integrate to a new culture, and some forms of peer pressure as well that are very strong. So the first 3 months of university are indeed have been found to be like a very high risk moment in the life of newcoming students on campuses. And then we're going to go on to another question.
It is not going to work. I think we should.
It's not going to work?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe I can just mention it briefly. The last number that we wanted to share with you is that 6 out of 10 women in the EU have been found to have experienced workplace sexual harassment or violence, which is, again, a high number. Okay, so now that we've identified this, I'm going to let Juliette take over to talk about how we can better identify situations and stop them in time.
Yes, thank you, Elena. Okay, so where do we go from now? We know that we have an emergency to tackle, which is sexual violence experienced at university especially, and in society at large. We know actually with the bystander effect that people don't feel equipped when they witness cases of sexual harassment, sexual violence. So how do we change that? And no, wrong slide. So we're going to talk about how to identify harassment. And here I am going to share with you a system that my co-author and I created when we wrote the guide, It's Not That Gray. Because we thought that surely there's something that can be done before things get to that point where things seem to have gone so far. Surely something can be done in the early stages of any issue related to sexual violence. So this was really our goal when we wrote that guide. And so we designed what we call the red flag system, which is a system that can help people to train themselves to identify harassment in its early stages in order to then know what to do about it. But before I tell you a bit more about the red flag system, we have a little exercise that we would like you to do. And you should have received printed case studies in the room, right? And for those online, don't worry, we'll share it with you. So do people in the room have the printed case study?
Hi, Juliette. We don't really have it. I don't know.
Okay. Don't worry. We're
Okay.
going to figure it out. Okay, so what I'm going to do, Eleonore, if you can copy the link in the chat for those of you who are online, and I am going to share it with my screen. It's going to be a little DIY, but hopefully it's going to work out for you. So give me a second. I'm just going to open it on my computer and share it on the screen. Just while I do that, what we want you to do with this exercise, and you can see it on the slide, is read that story and think for yourself, what is your first red flag? So at what point in the story do you tell yourself, I think something is off here, regardless of whether you can explain it or not? And the second thing is, can you identify in that story the moment when you are sure that something is wrong, where there's no doubt about it, you realize, okay, this is not okay, this is not normal, whatever is happening. All right, so I'm gonna share it. Unfortunately, it's in 2 pages, so I will have to switch the page. I'm gonna try to adapt to your rhythm in the room, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna work out just fine. Okay, can you read it, people in the room?
Not really, right? No, if you make it a little bit, well, you zoom in. No, we could before when it was in the PDF and it was bigger, right? Yeah.
Maybe what we can do is, yeah, make it a bit bigger and maybe
Yeah, we can zoom in. Yeah, yeah, it starts to be better. Can you make it a little more? Is this fine? Yeah, we're gonna adapt to it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna start sliding down just one paragraph. Can you give me a sign if people in the room are done reading the case study?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for your patience. You were meant to receive a printed copy of it, so I really apologize. This is the beauty of hybrid workshops. It's quite complicated to make it happen, so thank you for your patience with that. Okay, so I might just summarize the case study. So we have a student who gets to know a very renowned professor who seems at the beginning willing to take her under his wing, make sure that she has a brilliant university academic path, and then bit by bit we realize that actually none of this is free, and there's an expectation from that professor of counterpart, something in return to everything that he's giving that person, with towards the end what we can imagine an attempt sexual assault, or at least a high risk of it happening. What we ask you to do for now is to keep it park for yourself. So what were your red flags? Because we're going to work again on the case study. There's no right or wrong answer here. There's the fact that your first red flag would be in the very first sentence doesn't mean that you succeeded in this exercise. The role of the purpose of this is to first highlight that all of us have our own alert system. It depends on our education, of previous experiences, the place where we grew up, the culture, but also as culture, I mean a given culture in the community, such as university culture, because if you're told that things are okay and they're brushed off every time they happen, then it's harder to really connect to your own sense, your own alert system, and think, oh, that's not okay, if everyone around you is basically telling you that it's not a problem, that these behaviors are not a problem. And so from this point on, the interest of the red flag system is to help people realize that actually harassment happens on the spectrum. It does happen for sexual harassment that you would just take an elevator with a person that you may or may not know, and they would suddenly touch you inappropriately. It does happen. There's no point in denying it, but it is not the majority. And actually, this is an example between professor and a student, it could be an example between two students, it could be an example between two professors or different staff at a university. Often it builds up over time. And so that's the whole purpose of the red flag system, is to highlight that one red flag may not be problematic in itself, but it's in combination with others. So it's not a problem to be a renowned professor and to be willing to help your student to achieve academic success. But if we take it in combination with other things, we realize that actually it's a risk factor. To give a compliment to someone is wonderful. We're not saying you should forbid people to compliment each other, but giving a compliment and then suddenly playing hot and cold with someone is then a way to actually create emotional dependency and to reduce bit by bit their ability to consent to whatever is happening to them. Because if someone has been so nice to you for such a long time and suddenly their behavior changed, but very subtly, it's very hard to say, actually, I'm not okay with it, because then there's a sense of guilt that can come up. To give an example, only one problematic behavior, always problematic, in whatever circumstance, obviously is sexual violence. So whether it's combined with other things or it's taking place, like we said, out of the blue, even though it's not the majority, always problematic. The rest of behaviors, you could always in other contexts consider that they are okay. Another thing is that, sexual harassment can begin very seemingly harmlessly and develop over time. So again, harassment happens on the spectrum most of the time. And then finally, sexual harassment is more about power than it is about sex. Sex is consented. Sexual harassment is not. Sexual violence is not consented. So you cannot consider it sex. It's a way to assert power over someone else. Like I said, by an array of behaviors diminishing bit by bit the ability, the capacity of the person to consent to what is happening, because it builds over time. Some things that you will see in the guide if you download it, and I really hope you do so, and also share it with the world if you feel like it, because it's free. We made it free for that reason. But anyway, I'm diverging now. Is we put the different red flags into categories to make it easier for readers to see what exactly are the red flags that we're talking about. So one of them is the good guy syndrome. Again, not saying it's a problem to be a renowned professor. Good for you if you are, or if there's people around you, fantastic. But if we start using that someone is renowned and great as an excuse for their behavior, and their behavior that may be problematic, then it's a red flag. If I'm saying, oh, this person would never hurt a fly, so whatever accusation is made against them cannot be true, that's a red flag. Other environmental factors, and here when we talk about university, I think it's quite important ones: high, strong power dynamics, a strong hierarchy. I'm not, of course, you're not discovering that today, that at university is very present. There can be an unchallenged sexist culture, either in university at large, but also in different universities among students, or in different types of student associations. For example, sexism may be considered part of the deal, whatever is happening. And when it's unchallenged, that's a risk factor. These are examples. And then things that relate to really the individual level. So we talk about behaviors, and here it's not to say that targets of harassment are responsible for to them and how they behave, but actually our behaviors, and that applies to witnesses as well, bystanders, how we feel and how we behave might be an indication that something is off. So for example, I know that when I see something that's not okay, I have a bull in my stomach, or I start having this internal dialogue with myself that Eleanor talked about. So these are signs that maybe something is happening and it shouldn't. Freezing in the face of a problematic behavior is also an indication. We know that freezing can be a common response to people that are exposed to sexual violence, because their brain is trying to protect them from whatever is happening. So going against the myth that, oh, that person didn't say no, so it can be a rape, or they didn't react in the moment. Well, that's a freezing mechanism. And finally, common harassment techniques. So in the story, we see a few ones, such as playing hot and cold with someone after putting them on the pedestal, creating emotional dependency. Other classic techniques may be switching the conversation from the public domain to the private domain. So for example, having conversations on a private WhatsApp number instead of university email. These are also a sign that things are involved in a situation that could be problematic. Again, offering gifts, expecting reciprocity. Apologies. Could be also a red flag. Oh, I'm nice to you, so therefore you should give me sex, for example. Well, that's highly problematic, obviously. So this is about the red flag system, and then we will talk a bit about how we use the red flag system and this case study to talk about bystander intervention. So, and it's over to you, Eleonora.
Okay. So as we saw with Juliette, there are like a few red flags that can be used to identify that a situation is going in the wrong direction, and hopefully we can try to stop it before it goes too bad. So that's what we call being an active bystander. There are bystander interventions programs a little bit that have been developed a little bit all over the world. There's the Intervention Initiative that's taking place in the UK. There are organizations and programs like the Green Dots or Step Up, but also Culture of Respect at NASPA. And also, while the Sexe et Consentement Association in France is giving workshops around bystander, how to be an active bystander in France. So those are a few examples of programs that exist. And now we're going to see how we can be active bystanders.
Yeah, I'm just going to add something. So culture of respect one, we know that it's actually the new name of another program that used to be called Bringing in the Bystander. And we know that if there are people in the room, both rooms, virtual or not, from Dresden University, we actually know that this is a program that is used in Dresden University. We also know that Warwick University has a bystander intervention program. So we'd be very curious to have a discussion about your experiences either today or later on. Another thing that we wanted to say about it and why actually bystander interventions are important in university and it might be relevant to you as the EUTOPIA network is that EUTOPIA, one of your missions is to promote and ensure that higher education is inclusive and accessible to all students. And actually, bystander intervention programs, sexual harassment prevention initiatives, by reducing violence, actually enable as many students to feel confident and comfortable in the university space and actually stay and not be driven out because they're facing situations that they're not getting any support for. So that's what I wanted to add.
Exactly.
And one more thing is sex et consentement, actually why we put it as a good practice, not just because we think that we're great. I mean, we do think we're doing a good and important job, but sex et consentement is actually one of the official partners of the French Ministry of Higher Education. So our work on sexual harassment prevention and bystander intervention is recognized officially in the university world in France.
Thank you, Juliette. Okay, so now that we know this, how do we take action? The first thing before seeing those 5 Ds is to identify basically when there is a problem. So we first need to notice that there is an issue, what we can do with the red flags, for instance. We can interpret then that's the issue, that the situation is inappropriate or abnormal. Then we can assume responsibility. So again, we can ask ourselves, am I not intervening because no one is intervening, the bystander effect that we mentioned earlier? Or is there something that I can do, and will I step up and take the responsibility to take action here? Also, can I assume responsibility given my position? And finally, you need to know how to act to be able to take action. So that's what we're going to see now. So different ways of taking action as an active bystander have been summarized by organizations such as Hollaback in 5 Ds. Those 5 Ds are direct for direct action, distract for distracting the perpetrator of harassment or violence, delay. Delay is a very important D because it concerns everything that happens after the fact. I'll come back to it in a second. And delegate, which is asking for help whenever you do not feel in a position to intervene. So for instance, if you're witnessing harassment in public transport and you want to call out the driver of the bus, for instance, to intervene and kick out the person who's molesting another passenger, that's a possibility, that's delegating. And you can also document. Documenting means basically making sure that you can maybe take a picture or a video or note down things that you have witnessed, seen, or heard, so that you can then bring them to victims to see whether they want to use those in case they want to file a complaint, for example. It's very important when you document things to not use those things that you have documented without the consent of the people who have suffered whatever happened. This is very important for many reasons, but basically just remember, if you do document something, always ask the victims for their consent before using it. So why is delay particularly important? Delay is anything that has to do with supporting the victim after the fact, or for instance, also possibly going to see the perpetrator of harassment, for instance, and letting them know that what they did was unacceptable. This is very important because it helps both victims, but also to change culture around sexual violence or harassment or other types of discriminations. It's also important to know of those different Ds those different types of actions, because a lot of people think when we talk about being an active bystander, about intervening, like a lot of people think of direct action, of jumping into the fights, but that's not actually what we ask of you. Sometimes it's just creating a distraction, like causing a little incident, spilling your coffee over someone, or if you enter a room and you see a situation between a student and a professor, for instance, that seems a bit off, asking if they have seen your umbrella or your jacket is an option. Anything that can diffuse the tension or provides an opportunity for exiting to any of the parties involved. And again, delay, bringing support to the victims is always very, very important. Here we had planned to have a Google Doc activity. Since very few of us are actually online, I'm not sure how we can go about this.
So what we could do is we're gonna put the three of you who are online in the breakout room, and we'll explain in a bit what the exercise is going to be about, and maybe the wonderful support team on site can help people in the room to put themselves into groups. I think groups of 4 people would be great. I forgot how many you are on site. I think 18 or maybe a bit less.
No, we're no more, I think. More than 18, yeah,
Well,
for
that's
sure.
great. Fantastic.
How many groups do you want to make, or how many should they be in every group?
I think groups of 4 would be great.
Can we make that?
Or people can
29?
just organize themselves. Just don't do it yet. I'm just gonna explain the rules, or we're gonna explain the exercise, and then you can start making the groups.
7 groups.
Juliette, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, of course. So ignore the thing about the Google Doc. What we would like you to do is to discuss with your group in the story who are the possible bystanders, and list all the possible actions you can think of that they could take in that story at any point. Keeping in mind the 5 Ds. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put, wrong slide. I'm going to put this again, so you have the 5 Ds here. So try and think as many actions as you can. So list all the possible bystanders in the story and think about what they could have done. And we're going to take 10 minutes for this.
Hi, Juliette. I don't know if I have it clear. Are you gonna explain now the activity, or did you explain it already?
I just did. Is it not clear? Should I explain
I think
it
we are
again?
splitting in groups now here, so it's a little mess right now. But if you can explain it in a minute.
Yes. I'm just going to put the slide again here.
Okay.
So these are the 2 questions that participants should answer.
Exactly. Okay, that's
to write
perfect.
them, I will put then again the slide on the 5 Ds to have inspiration. Does that work? I will assume yes.
Are we ready in groups? Yeah, I think we are, kind of. Can we listen to Juliette for a moment, please? So she will explain us the workshop.
The instructions are on the screen.
So basically what we're asking you to do is to remember the story that we just talked about and identify and list who are the possible bystanders in the story, the possible witnesses, and what are the possible actions that they could take to de-escalate the situation. If you want to note this down, each group, if you can name a facilitator, someone who writes it down, and then it'll be great if we can.
Okay, I think we have it. Yeah.
Great.
So you have to remember the story of the before, the one of the professor and the student, and identify the bystanders, okay? And
I'm not sure exactly what you're seeing on the screen. Can you see the slide? Can you hear me? Apparently not. Can anyone in the room hear me? Okay, let me
Juliette,
try
were you
again.
saying
Yes,
something?
yes, I was. Yes.
Okay, let's listen to Juliette.
No, I just want to know what exactly you're seeing on the screen. Can you see the slides? I'm not sure.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
But yes, we can
That's
see it.
better. Thank you.
Okay, you have 2 more minutes and we need only one speaker per group just to share your thoughts, please. Juliette, can you please put the slide where there were the instructions of the discussion, please? Thank you.
Can I call back your fellow participants who are in the online room, and if you can start gathering again as well in the conference on site. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So excuse me.
Yes.
What we suggest to do now is...
Please, everyone, can you listen to Juliette? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I have no idea what's happening in the room. We actually have no idea. So it's an interesting experience. Okay, so what we would like to suggest is that each group can talk very quickly so we have time to hear from everyone and to make it as efficient as possible. We will ask you to name one bystander and one action they could take only. Just one bystander and one action. I'm just going to put again the 5 Ds. So if one group has already talked about one D in particular, maybe try to talk about another D. And please keep it to one bystander, one action, so we have time to hear from everyone before we can close and move on to the Q&A. And Lucia and Nuria, I will ask you to facilitate the discussion in the room since we cannot see it. So you can designate a group. One bystander, one action. Go ahead.
Okay, so do you want to talk first?
Yeah. Hello, we are the VUB, so it's something we proposed. So we already did the thing, so maybe, but I will say something. We say the colleagues and an action that they can do is talk to their principal or dean at the faculty.
Okay, thank you. So direct action, then reporting, delegating actually, it would be the one.
Hello. We're half VUB and half Ljubljana. So if I choose only one, it's maybe to distract. So at the conference, when the professor got really drunk, the people at the conference or his colleagues or the staff at the hotel could have distracted him or could have stepped in and maybe helped the girl out. when they saw that she was struggling. So yeah.
Thank you for that. Do you have a suggestion of what they could have done, for instance, like as a distraction?
I mean, one of the hotel staff could have just stepped in and said, well, okay, I'm going to take care of him instead of the girl. Maybe the colleagues could have stepped in like a couple of drinks earlier and said, well, okay, you're here with a student, maybe this is too much, stop it when you still can.
Great, so that would be maybe a bit of distract, but also a lot of direct action in a way, intervening directly and stepping in. Thank you for that.
We're also a mixed team. We're VB and CY here. Yeah, and to complement what Nate said just a while ago, I think we also, as hotel staff, if you see like someone who's really, really drunk and like a younger person having to really steer them to their hotel room, even if you don't know the relationship, they could be father and daughter, or they could be, you know, very good friends anyways. But if you see someone who's really drunk and one person taking care of it, maybe you should also step in and see how you can help assist, bring the person to the hotel room. And yeah, that's what we thought.
Thank you. So that would be both, yeah, direct action and distraction. Is there another group?
No, I think we already said
Oh.
it's almost the same.
Okay. Yeah, coming. Does anyone have something?
Yeah, I can say something.
Yes.
So one of the bystanders that we identified are the class and the professors. And one of the actions one could take is to, as a professor, maybe ask the student, how do you feel about this, and raise some of the things the professor has seen.
Yes, that's great. So that could be part of delay if it happens right after, or that's also a way to de-escalate the situation if you ask the student how she's doing in the situation as it is happening. Thank you.
So we are a mixed team with CYU and the university from Romania. We also thought of professors and students, but more particularly students if they are saying something, saying that they are too close, or if the main character just reported to a student, maybe they can be a role made and created for a student to be both alpha staff and a student, for students to be able to talk to that person with quite like in a peer situation. So it's a student talking to a student and have more facility to talk with, and so that person, that student, could also act and report it to the university.
Okay, so that would be kind of a student counselor or someone who would be trained to intervene as a student and who would maybe have it as a job from the university on the side of their studies. That's a possibility indeed, and then it would be more direct action and delay as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was all the groups. Great.
Maybe the group online wants to also add something. If you had one representative that can tell us what you, if there's anything you want to add compared to everything that's been said. Don't be shy.
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Maya from University of Ljubljana. In the group, we also discussed about that we would approach to the student and ask them maybe about their feelings after with the delay. How do they feel about it? Is this something that it's okay with them? And that also possibly inform them about the possibilities, taking actions with maybe some counselor, or they report it to the HR department or to the management, how in this kind of way maybe. And that also checking with schoolmates in the classroom, if it was the action made in the classroom, what were their observations. This is some kind of documenting also, seeing who's seen also this, so that then maybe this could be also an evidence later in the process.
Great, thank you so much. Indeed, those are very good suggestions. It's also important to note that indeed you can, in the delay part, you can provide information as to what options are available to the person who has been a potential victim of something. Part of what you can provide them in terms of information is emergency numbers that apply to your country and university, or where to file a report within the university or in the city you're in, for instance. So that's very important, again, to keep in mind and to try to identify those numbers and resources for your university, for your own campus, but also for the region where you work and where you work with students as well. Okay, so I think pretty much all the Ds were identified for this, so that's great. Thank you so much for that. Some of the bystanders that were identified were fellow students of the person who has been a victim in this situation, or as a victim of sexual harassment. Fellow professors who could have intervened, both at the university at home or as well, like fellow conference attendees that could have potentially stepped in. We also found that hotel staff could have intervened, conference staff. So yeah, a lot of people can be bystanders and a lot of people are bystanders, but not all of them are active bystanders. And we've just identified ways that they can be active bystanders. So again, I think what's very important with what we've said today is to learn to identify those red flags that Juliette talked about earlier and discusses more in detail with more examples if you want to look into it in her book. It's Not That Great. And once you've learned to identify red flags or to identify situations that may be problematic, then you have those 5 Ds, so direct action, distract, delay, delegate, and document, that you can do to be an active bystander, to intervene and prevent a situation before it escalates too far or de-escalate it. This is very important, and we hope that you can take this with you. And now we want to have 15 minutes to open the ground for questions if you have any. Thank you so much.
That was our last slide. Maybe, but you already.
Yes, sorry. In terms of, why again intervene? We mentioned it before, but so yes, it can prevent a situation from escalating further, de-escalate violence, discriminations, or microaggressions. You can make a difference in someone's life. That's true both if you intervene and prevent a situation, but also when you intervene in the delay parts, so after the fact, so that you support the person and provide them with resources and steps that they can take to move on, or at least get support. You can also have conversations, talk about what we talked about in this workshop, bring those 5 Ds with you around to change the culture in your university if you feel that it might not be, if you feel that more can be done to prevent violence on your campus, or if you feel that your campus is doing really well, maybe other campuses that you work with in your work can benefit from your experience. So changing the culture takes discussion and also the courage of bringing up those conversations, and also fostering inclusion. So by ensuring a safe environment, your campus will become more inclusive. And that's, again, one of the missions of the EUTOPIA consortium. So we really encourage you to take this with you, spread it around, and try to apply it as much as possible in your day-to-day work. So, questions?
So if you're online, you can use the raise your hand button or tell us in the chat. And Nuria and Lucia, you can tell us who in the room would like to ask a question.
Yes. Okay. They're already here. They work very fast. So I'm Lisa. I'm from the VUB. And I had a question. I'm a sociology student, so I'm also kind of coming at this from maybe a structural perspective. what I also noticed in the case study is that obviously the students, whether this professor was okay or not, was trapped in a system where this one person had a lot of structural power and they could make or break the career. So I'm just gonna very quickly take off my mask if that's okay. I was wondering, I've been in situations where I have been a bystander and I want to help or intervene. And then you go up to a person that might be a potential victim and they actually go like, no, get away from me, you can't help me. And they actually refuse to even acknowledge that they are in a situation where they are being, you know, it seems very much from the outside that they are stuck and they are being abused. And how, do you have any wise words about that? Because then you're kind of standing there going like, oh, you just have to let this situation roll out and happen. And you're seeing it and it's quite kind of a bit hopeless sometimes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing this up. It is indeed something that can happen, that you go up to someone who says like, no, nothing's happening, don't worry about it. By still making the effort to go to this person and asking if that person is okay, or just stating maybe an I statement saying like, oh, I saw this and I was just, you know, I just wanted to check in on you. By doing that, even if the person tells you they're fine and that nothing's happening, you do let the person know that they're seen. You do let the person know that something might be happening, that this person is not going crazy, because maybe this person right now is being defensive also because perhaps the perpetrator is nearby, or they're still kind of in a denial, trying to convince themselves that something is not really happening. But by stating this, you're helping them realize if indeed something is going wrong, that they are not just imagining it, and that you have been a witness and that you are there potentially to support them. And you also let them know that in the same way that this isn't acceptable, and this is very important for them to know, that they're not the only one who might feel that way. So even if they say that everything's fine on the moment, it might be that later they feel better because you have said something at that moment, and it might help them later to try to take action and to realize, perhaps maybe even a little faster if they're still in the denial phase, that something is going on, and maybe they can try to take action to step out.
I wanted to add something also about the first part of your intervention. Thank you for your question about just the systemic or structural issue here. And obviously the workshops that we give, and when we're talking about bystander intervention specifically, are here to give tools to individuals about what to do, even though we said that it changes the culture, but it goes in pair with system change, with having mechanisms in universities that are transparent, that are easily understandable, that are accessible, with people that are trained, with clear procedures, with a lot of characteristics that can prevent and support people who may be in a conflict of interest situation, etc. So we do advocate for that as well. I mean, there's no way we can change the system only by acting at the individual level. Things have to happen at the structural level as well. And I think the EUTOPIA network is a great place to do that and to foster that kind of conversation and to learn, for universities to learn from each other. Things are changing in universities. With Sexe et Consentement, we intervene at different French universities, and we see that things are changing, but not in every place. And you can ask, in most of the time when we ask students in our workshops if they know what to do or where to go if they witness or experience harassment, they have no idea. They don't know who's in charge. They don't know what's the procedure. They think that it might be, there might be retaliation towards them. So there's a lot of work to do about that for sure. So thank you for raising that as well.
Anyone has another question? Yes? So we have another one.
First of all, thank you for this workshop. And I would just like to ask, is this mandatory for your staff at VUB? You have this for staff and students to take the workshop, the training. how.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I don't work
No,
at
it's not.
VUB.
Oh, sorry.
I was
Okay,
training for
sorry.
the VUB. So no, but I can.
Okay.
What it's still. Thank you for the question because it's a very interesting one.
Yes.
So at the VUB it was not mandatory, but I think the fact that we had in total almost 400 people attending,
Yes.
both staff and
Yeah.
students, showed that
Yes.
there's a need. And actually, Eleanor, you want to talk about interventions with sex and consentement and the fact that they are mandatory. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was talking. Oh no, because I was thinking we have a kind of thinking of this, but it's each department or unit has to decide if they want their staff to have this mandatory, and there is a kind of the training and the workshop and the action plan that they have to deliver after that. It's a part of a kind of a certification. So if you have gone to that, in this case, it's not sexual harassment, it's about LGBTB. So, but it could be because we work with inclusion and this is about equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So it could be a training in that could cover all those things. And that's why I'm asking is what is the top management? Is it mandatory, for example, can the faculty, the dean of the faculty, say that we do this in our faculty, all staff and students should have at least one training session on this? So that
Thank you so much for your question. It's a very important one indeed. I think this depends on every country and every university, unfortunately. But what we do know is that if those trainings can be made mandatory, they have a much wider reach and a better effect. Because otherwise what tends to happen is that if it is only voluntary presence, then only the people who are already pretty aware of the situation or pretty fairly sensitized on those questions will come, whereas the people that might need to hear those trainings the most might not feel concerned or interested, and therefore might not attend if it's not mandatory. An evolution that we've seen in France is that until very recently, this wasn't mandatory. This wasn't really a thing that was being discussed, making those trainings mandatory. So actually, with Sex et Consentement, we started working in universities. Most workshops were with voluntary attendance, and we saw indeed that it was mostly women coming and people who already had quite a bit of knowledge on the issue. Now, this is also where legislation can come into play, and depending on how much leeway you can have, maybe an advisory role as universities towards the government, for instance, of your countries, that can be something to be suggested, or even if you want to see with the direction of your university, if that can be a policy that can be set up. Maybe it cannot be mandatory, but strongly encouraged, for instance, or make it an activity for an extra credit for students, for instance. That can be something that can encourage attendance. So in France, what happened is that the Ministry of Higher Education made it mandatory for administrations to be trained on this, and as well, or at least on the procedures for signaling violence, reporting violence, and taking care of victims. And also the French government made it mandatory for student associations, like representatives, to have been trained on issues regarding consent and sexual violence prevention in order to receive funding to pursue their activities throughout the year. So those are things that have been put in place in France that can be probably replicated in other places. I know in the US as well, there are quite a few universities such as Dartmouth that make it mandatory for staff to take an online course and students to take an online course regarding sexual violence prevention and sexist and sexual violence on campus within the first few weeks of their arrival. And if they do not, and I think it's repeated every year, if they do not, they lose their university email address. So that makes it pretty straightforward for staff and students that they have to do those trainings to be able to continue their studies or their job. Those are some strategies.
To answer your question, no, it's not mandatory. So I'm Ralf Devos, I'm the HR director of the VUB, and we're offering this bystander training because in EUTOPIA we have also an HR work package where we have supporting services to the academics. So we thought it was a very good idea to have this in EUTOPIA to start a discussion, because that's the real issue. I mean, the flag system is very useful. If you write a policy notes, a paper on these matters, you come with a red flag because it's very contextual, situational approach, where the same things in situation A are really a red flag, and in other situations it's an orange flag or a green flag. And so it's very useful, and I thank you for opening up to the world. The real issue is the policy, and if you need a policy or not as a university. And I don't know any Belgian university with a policy on, okay, this is about sexual harassment, but it's part of interpersonal relations. How do you act with interpersonal relationships in your university? And that's a big topic, because two reasons are always, and I'm already writing a policy paper for our university on interpersonal relationship, but the two reasons why they say no, you don't have to write it, this is, first, no, there is no problem, so you don't have to make a policy. I mean, I'm not saying that's my position, but I'm just giving the arguments. And the second one is, and I don't know what's the worst, and the second is, if there's a problem, it's a private problem, and you can't mingle in those kind of things. Even Oxford is struggling with this. I don't know if you followed the news on, there's a proposed, and I don't think they already managed to have a decision on it, because as you all know, universities work very slowly, but there was a proposal to ban sexual relationships between students and personnel in Oxford. And then there came a huge row, because at the one side you had the things, okay, there's a hierarchy between students and professors, so you can't speak about consensual relationships. It's always with a power item. And so, okay, that's what's one side. And the other side said, yeah, but wait, we didn't fight from the 60s on to have a liberation of women to have sex with who they want to, even if there's a professor, to have this ban in our universities now. So you get with the whole policy issue, do we need a policy on interpersonal relationships? And it's I think it's a question that we have to get over it from utopian view, and not only in our university, because you get a very narrow focus on policy. And so that's why we're doing this, and to start the discussion, because it's even if we do agree about all the things, don'ts and do's with sexual harassment, if you talk about interpersonal relationships, everybody gets really cringed and annoyed about what we are doing. So that's what I wanted to add to the discussion, maybe to start something new.
Thank you so much. Yes, I just want to talk about the argument that this is about interpersonal relationships. Well, there's different things. First of all, I can say in Belgium, and I'm pretty sure in all countries represented, there's an obligation of employers to guarantee employees' well-being, and it's a legal obligation. And actually preventing sexual harassment is part of it. Sexual harassment is not about interpersonal relation. It's a danger for people's health. It's a danger for their ability to perform their work, to be able to stay in the institution. And so this is not about people misunderstanding. It can only be misunderstood if sexual harassment is not defined. Of course, if there's no definition of sexual harassment in a code of conduct, then it's always possible to argue. But actually, the law says a number of things. Of course, the law is different in different countries, but the law says something, so that's something you can always base yourself off. There's an obligation to protect employees, so why not extend it to protecting students? And universities already have code of conducts that say that certain behaviors are not allowed, such as, for example, plagiarism, such as bribing people in exchange for different services, etc. Sexual harassment should be part of it. And I mean, there's an array of international texts, international conventions that are actually saying that sexual violence is a public health issue and therefore it should be prevented. So there's also enough material available at different levels from the local, national, international level to actually justify that something needs to be done. And it means actually showing bravery and being willing to be sometimes a pioneer and say, yeah, there's no universities. I'll take the example of Belgium. There are no universities in Belgium doing that. Well, let's be the first one to do so and say, everyone, like there's so many people who have been talking for years that we need to prevent sexual violence. Maybe it's about time. So I think there's a whole part of political will and bravery to actually go against those myths around sexual violence, stomp our foot and say, actually, it has to stop now. And we need to protect our people, because otherwise we lose potential, we lose creativity, and we put people in danger. Simply as that. Thank you so much for your question.
We had one question in the just online. I think you had your hand raised for a while, so maybe we can take that last question and then close.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that I think this discussion is really interesting when it comes to the sexual harassment. I think we should take actions about all kinds of harassments, in this field by the idea of the bystanders. And maybe small steps can be done by spreading the awareness that about being responsible employee, co-worker, colleague, in this kind of way that we detect it and we say it's wrong. So this could be also a bottom-up approach in this field and building this kind of interpersonal skills in this field so that we don't ignore it. Any kind of discrimination, not just sexual. So maybe we can do something about it, spread it,
Thank you. Absolutely. There's a lot we can do also as a collective. And so indeed, if your university or government doesn't have specific policies in place yet, you can take action to work with members, with co-workers, with colleagues, with students as well, to try to find solutions and change the culture within your university. We're going to close now because we're already 5 minutes.
Yes, and people has to go also.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Before we close, anyone in the room, please scan the QR code that you can see on your screen before you go. You will also receive the link by email, but obviously with value, any feedback that you may have, feel free to get in touch with us if you want to discuss that topic more. We always welcome that. Also going to copy it in the chat for those of you who are online. So if you have 5 minutes between different sessions to fill the workshop survey, we would be very, very grateful. So we will let you scan it. We'll send an email to participants through the organizers, so you can get in touch with us if you feel like it, and follow also our social media, etc. So thank you again. Thank you for your time. Thank you for staying until a bit later than past. We really appreciate it. And we wish you a lovely day, a great end of conference, and maybe see you soon.
Thank you
So much.